Welcome to Off the Post. I'm Russ Cohen. We've got Anthony Mingione. And how are you?
I'm doing okay this fine Saturday. Russell, how are you?
Pretty good. Yeah, it's nice out. We're not going to talk about the NFL draft here, so if you were here for that, tune out. We have Michael Jello. Mike, how are you?
Well, good morning, Russ. I'm just wondering whether you and Anthony are going to have a bench clearing brawl like the Phillies and Mets did last night.
I would not say to Anthony, come on and get it unless I really was prepared to back that up. That's just my feeling.
I do have the singular ability to get under Russell's skin as he does me, so I think there's a decent chance we might come to blows, but we'll see.
It hasn't happened yet.
Not yet.
And we have the legendary writer Eric Duhatschek on from The Athletic. Eric, how are you?
I'm good. I remember a time when bench clearing brawls were a hockey thing and not a baseball thing. So
Yeah, that's true. That's in the good old days for all of this stuff. It's all changing. But all right, let's start out of the gate, Eric. We know about the new TV deal. And the one thing I am worried about, because I've seen it happen in Major League Baseball, is the last deal that they cashed in on really hurt them at the gate. And they've never gotten the gate back. There are so many empty seats now at ball games. Even with good teams like the Yankees, they don't get to capacity anymore for every game. Do you worry about this happening with the NHL? Because we're now, with the pandemic, basically teaching people to watch at home.
You know what? That's a great question, Russ. And I have to tell you, it's not something I thought about a lot. I mean, what I would tell you is historically, of all of the four major professional sports leagues, if you count the NHL as one of them, they are the one league that relies the most on gate receipts, and fans seem to enjoy the live game experience at hockey, maybe more so than baseball, football, basketball. And I would say that that's just because if you're trying to lure a new audience to the game, there's something about always happening in hockey. I mean, I was a fan of baseball as a kid, but when I went to baseball games as an adult, it was mostly to have a hot dog, drink beer, catch up with, friends, and then, occasionally something would happen in the game. I was never someone that was poised on the edge of my seat watching every moment of every game. And I think that that's what the hockey live experience does for you. So I would say that the only thing that I would be concerned about, well, two things. One, the comfort level of people coming back to a packed indoor facility, and that would apply to basketball too. And I do think that a lot will depend on your age. I mean, I'm 65 right now, and big music guy. In hockey games, I'm in the press box, but when I'm going to concerts, I'm down in the, on the floor or in the seats. And I've wondered if I've seen my live games. So I think that there will be a certain resistance in terms of going to live events, but not necessarily because of the television deal. It will be because of the aftermath and the repercussions of COVID.
Eric, the North Division has been rather interesting. I don't know how many people would sign up for another year of it, and that will be part of my second question. But right now, the Leafs lead. They have a substantial lead over Edmonton. There seems to be a battle between Winnipeg and Montreal as to who will lose more games before the end of the regular season. Just give me your general overview of this division going into the postseason, because right now I can't make heads or tails of who is going to step into the playoffs on a good note and who's struggling and who does what when the first round starts.
Yeah. Well, at this time of year, I almost always do a story leading into the playoffs about how there is never a direct correlation between how you finish and then the success that you have in the playoffs, because there are some teams that carry a ton of momentum into the final month and it just never stops. The St. Louis Blues, when they won their championship, were a good example of that. But there's an awful lot of teams that were 500 down the stretch, kind of limping into the playoffs, not firing on all cylinders, and they get it going in the first week and it's onward and upward. So I don't read too much into, say, Winnipeg's struggles right now. I mean, they've lost 6 in a row as we do this broadcast, and they look terrible. But on paper, they're a good team, and I think that they are going to have lots to prove in these playoffs. But I always go back to who has the best team, and I think Toronto has the best team. So all things being equal, and if Toronto gets the goaltending, which is the big question mark there, I think they are the class of the North Division. But the one team that people seem to want to look past is Edmonton. And I think it's partly because the Leafs have had their way with Edmonton this year. I don't think that's another thing. I don't think that there's necessarily a great correlation between how teams fare in the regular season and how they do in the playoffs. So there's a part of me watching Edmonton play right now, watching how motivated Connor McDavid is. Oh my goodness! Like I've covered this game for a long time, and I'm stunned at what I see on a consistent basis from Connor McDavid every night, because he's blending the best of Wayne Gretzky in terms of hockey savvy and playing the game with his head with that Pavel Bure burst that he's capable of and leaves guys in his tracks. And we've all seen lots of players over the years that can play, that can skate really fast. And the minute the puck is on their stick or they have to make a decision with the puck, everything, they slow down. And McDavid is this rare exception that, he's going 100 miles an hour and he's still making great plays. I think there's a lot to be said for how much he can do for that team. I know it's a team game. I know he's only on the ice for 20 to 25, 6 minutes a night. Somebody else has to do the heavy lifting when he's on the bench. But there is a part of me that is watching the way he plays right now. It's a season for the ages, and he is so hungry for playoff success that I think that he can carry that team a long way. And if you were to ask me to make a prediction right this morning, and I always there's a part of me that thinks that Edmonton can be in the Final Four. And then it gets really interesting because nobody will have seen everybody else, and all of the game planning starts anew, and it's going to be fun. I think for the good of hockey, put it this way, for the good of hockey, people want to see Toronto win a championship because, it's been so long. But I also believe that Connor McDavid in the Final Four would just be spectacular this year.
Well, I will draisaitl and McDavid are the most dynamic duo in the league, and he's had an incredible season. The only thing I've come back to this with Edmonton constantly, and Mike Smith has made me a liar because I thought they were going to miss the playoffs because they didn't have the goaltending, and at 39 he's had a great year, but I just don't know whether he can last. He tweaked something last week, and everybody was in a panic because that meant Mikko Koskinen was going to be in that. I just don't know whether they can make it through 2 rounds against either Winnipeg and Toronto or whoever with the goaltending that they have. But that's just me.
I mean, no, it's a great question. But what I would tell you is that when Mike Smith's last year in Calgary, when they lost to Colorado as a heavy favorite, I mean, it's hard to believe that was only a couple of years back. But Calgary was the 1st seed, Colorado was the 8th seed. Colorado just steamrolled them, and the only guy that played beyond expectations was Mike Smith. I mean, he is ultra competitive, like a physically fit for 39, like you wouldn't believe. That component of moving the puck, it's taken, I think, a little while for everybody that's currently on this edition of the Oilers to get used to how he does that, because there have been a few changes, but he helps out of what's a fairly average defense, I think, on paper, and I think that's kind of the X factor there too, that he stops enough pucks, but he just assists the defense. He can move the puck up the ice with such great dispatch. I mean, he's one of the 5 greatest puck handling goalies of all time. So I'm less concerned about him as I am about the fact that it falls off so badly once you get past the top 4 or 5 forwards there. And so the players that remain in that sort of bottom 6 just have to cobble together enough invisible minutes to get McDavid and Draisaitl back on the ice. And I think they're capable of that. I think that they've again moved enough pieces in and out, and those Josh Archibalds of the world that Dave Tippett has some faith in are going to be okay when it comes time for the playoffs.
Eric, I found one weakness, though, with Connor McDavid, and that's his interior decorating. That all-black kitchen, that was really bad. I really am not a fan.
Well, don't you think that, like if you're the perfect human being, you have to have a flaw somewhere?
Yes, that's true.
I mean, he's, you're right. He, and frankly, his Zoom interviews could leave something to be desired too. I mean, it would be nice if he occasionally gave you something to seize on. When he answers, when someone asks him, how much does it mean to get to 100 points? Not a ton, but I think that there's a message even in that, right? I mean,
sure.
I've covered him since he came into the league, and where I'm based in Calgary, even when I was back at my former place of employ, the Globe and Mail, I drive up a bunch of times over the course of a season to Edmonton to do, the definitive Connor McDavid profile. So I've done enough of them over the years to observe him, watch him interact with people. I'm a great admirer. I think he's just a kid that, with all the attention he's had for such a young age, to be as normal as he is, and to have like the goals that you want to have in a superstar player, which is, it's fine for me to win these individual awards. I think he really wants to win the Hart this year. I think he was a bit disappointed in the results last year, but more than anything else, I think he's frustrated that they've done so little over the early arc of his NHL career in terms of the postseason, and you can just feel it. It's palpable.
Oh yeah,
how
we
much
all
he wants
know
to
it.
win.
Everybody knows it. Yeah.
So we're gonna flip to the other side of the Battle of Alberta in your neck of the woods with the Flames, Eric. I wanted to ask you about, at the moment, what is the status of Johnny Gaudreau's relationship with the team, with the Flames, with Coach Sutter? How are things going with regards? I know it's been a struggle for this season. He's second on the team in scoring, but it's always been kind of a question with regards to what is the sort of the long-term prognostication for Gaudreau? Is he staying? Is there a possibility he might be looking at other places to go? Just wanted to get your ideas on that.
Yeah, no, what I would tell you is that I think the relationship between Johnny Gaudreau and Daryl Sutter is better than I anticipated. Gaudreau, I think he's had points now in 6 or 7 games, and it surprises me a little bit because Daryl can be hard on players. I think we all know his reputation, but I also think that Gaudreau has thrived with that type of coach. When you think about Bob Hartley, very has a lot of similar qualities to Daryl Sutter in terms of how he handles players behind closed doors, and yet Gaudreau had some of his best seasons in the NHL playing for Bob. In terms of his long-term future, that's a great question, because I think a lot of people in Calgary have long believed that he ultimately wants to play the second half of his NHL career closer to home. He's very, very close with his family. They come out to visit when they can. Obviously, travel is restricted in the COVID era, and so you look at Philadelphia as a possible option. You look at New Jersey as a possible option. I can see the appeal of playing for both of those teams, even Boston, actually, because of his college career there. What I think is going to happen, pragmatically, is that once we get past the end of this season and Gaudreau has a year remaining on his contract, they'll sit down with his agent, Louis Gross, and really try to get a clear indication of whether he is interested in re-signing with the Flames, because publicly has said that. I've asked him that a number of times, and he said that he is happy to divide his personal life and his professional life. He goes back to the shore in the summer. He's got a great place there. The family all comes up to visit, and when he comes to Calgary, he goes into work mode, right? It's like Patrick Kane. He goes back to Buffalo in the summer, but his work life is in Chicago. So, but I think you get a clearer indication of whether that's just lip service or whether he actually means that when you start to negotiate a contract. If there's a willingness to talk extension, I think they would be interested. He's a dynamic, exciting player, and if you took him out of this lineup, there isn't a whole lot to watch that lifts you out of your seat. He's sort of the latter day Theo Fleury. When fans were in the building, if you walked around the building, it was Gaudreau jerseys and Giordano jerseys. So I think if he wants to stay, they want him to stay, and I think we'll get a clearer indication of that sometime between the end of the playoffs, the draft, the expansion draft, and the start of next season. And if it goes the other way, and if it looks like contract talks are stalled, then I think that they do have to explore what's out there in the market for a player of his caliber, because you probably can't afford you cannot afford to let him walk away for nothing.
No, that's true. Eric, the Seattle Kraken are in the league now, and me being a prospect guy, I've noticed, I would say the last few years especially, some players are definitely getting rushed to the NHL because of cap and also talent considerations from within teams. And now I kind of wonder, with this new team in there now, and I know this gets talked about all the time, but I think we may be getting close to a point where talent dilution could be a problem in the league. And because even Vegas doesn't have an adequate farm system. They've done it backwards, and they've been trying to win a cup. And when that stops, they're going to have to rebuild their farm system, which is kind of weird, right, for an expansion team. I don't know how Seattle's going to do it, but I'm just wondering what you think about the overall talent in the league when they come in, what that's going to be like.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure if going to 32 teams from 31 is necessarily going to dilute the talent pool that much, because basically what you're doing is you're adding 25 players. So like if the regular player pool, when you count players on injured reserve and so on and so forth, is around 750, now you're probably talking about 775. So there's an awful lot of interchangeable pieces at the bottom end, and you just have to see how many of these players come out of Russia and come out of Europe, and some of them thrive in the NHL, and some of them are complete busts, and they go back, and so much of it has to do not with talent but with the ability to adjust to a new society. So I think that was a concern when the NHL initially went down the expansion path in the 70s and 80s. I mean, some of those expansion teams were dreadful. They got no shot at all in terms of the way teams allocated talent to them, and I think that was you don't hear the term enlightened and the NHL used in the same sentence very often, but I do think that it was a very enlightened step when they gave Vegas a chance to be competitive. And then, George McPhee, the general manager there, brilliantly pitted teams against each other and put together a really nice group at the start. And when I look at the current landscape in the NHL right now, like every general manager you talk to, this is unbelievable. Before you can even ask a question, they're talking about the salary cap. And it is so common. Every conversation, you want to talk about trade rumors, you want to talk about this, you want to talk about that. They steer it all back to money. And I've never felt it like that before. I mean, it's been a function of the salary cap world for a long time, but never like this, right? So Seattle comes into this with a clean financial slate, and they are going to leverage that to the max. That's the part that fascinates me. How they are going to, they know they have to meet a certain minimum salary criteria through the expansion draft. So you prearrange your deals. So you pick somebody expensive off of Philadelphia's roster, but you get some consideration. If they don't want to provide the sweetener that you like, you go to somebody else, because every team wants to do that with you. So Ron Francis always had this reputation in Carolina as a manager that was really reluctant to do very much, and he was very prudent and very cautious. I think you're going to see the other side of Ron Francis. It's going to be wild, and I think they can be, if they play their cards right, they are going to be like Vegas, competitive right out of the gate. And I think most of the blueprint that Vegas used, I think Seattle will try to duplicate it. They keep saying, they're Vegas, we're Seattle, we're going to do things a little bit differently. But I think, Vegas established a path, used their cap space, maybe too much too soon, and maybe that will be the one lesson that Seattle used. Leave a little bit in arrears for because you'll be able to monetize that for probably 24 months. And but I think they're going to be really good. I think they're going to, because they got smart people running it, and the opportunities to pick off free agents, to make prearranged deals, to get good players, because you can't protect everybody that you want to protect. It'll be fascinating.
Eric, the NHL plans to have the Stanley Cup playoffs over with by the middle of July, so they can get back to an 82-game regular season, starting the preseason training camps in September and starting the season in October. The only thing that might put a wrinkle in that is the border situation between the U.S. and Canada. I mean, we've heard stuff about, our great president saying that July 4th would be the time that the borders would be open. But, the recent uptick in Ontario, especially, has sort of put a quash on that. I mean, from your contacts in the league, has the NHL planned for the eventuality of the borders still being closed, and does that mean another year of the same divisional setup?
Well, when you ask questions about that, so the first thing that they have to deal with is the crossover in the Stanley Cup semifinals. So what do you do with the single Canadian team that advances, and do you plunk them in a U.S. market and make that their home base, for the rest of the playoffs? And when you ask about that, the answer is you simply have to wait to see what the COVID landscape looks like in 6 weeks' time. So when you're asking a question about what the landscape may look like in the fall, they're saying, hey, we're just trying to figure out what the landscape is going to look like in June, because we need a plan to finish this season before we worry about next season. The other factor, and this eventually this is all going to come back to the schedule, and the other factor that still has to be decided is whether you schedule an Olympic break or not. And right now, they're stuck. I mean, this part drives me crazy. I keep hearing people reporting that, the IOC has other things on their mind right now because they've got, summer games that they're not sure they're going to get off. Well, they've had how many years to solve this thing? I mean, the problem hasn't changed. Yeah. The issues are still the same as they were when the NHL refused to go in 2018. It hasn't changed one whit. So the fact that we're still talking about this and it's less than, 10 months away is ridiculous as far as I'm concerned. But until they get a definitive answer, and they need that probably within the next 6 to 8 weeks, because at that point they do want to start framing a schedule. And that's important to Seattle. I mean, Seattle, more than anything else, wants a schedule in place at the traditional time, end of June, beginning of July, so they can start selling seasons tickets, so they can start, getting going. And so I guess that's a long way of answering. I think they're hoping to go forward with a regular season with the divisions going back to the way they were. And I suppose if that can't happen, they'll have to, dream up a fresh scenario on the fly. But I don't think that there's going to be like a third schedule in their back pockets. Like right now, there's a tentative Olympic schedule and that tentative, we're not playing in the Olympic schedule. I suppose, in the back of people's minds, there's another way of doing that. But that's so far on the back burner right now that, they haven't, they've got other things that they have to deal with in the present, and whether they have to play within Canada in October or November is far from their minds right now.
Eric, on Thursday, we of course saw the in Pennsylvania, we of course saw the combination of both the Philadelphia Flyers officially mathematically being eliminated from the playoffs and the Pittsburgh Penguins officially clinching a playoff berth. There's been a continuous juxtaposition between the Pennsylvania teams between the last few years. Last year, Philadelphia seemed like they were on the ascension, and the Penguins seemed like they were on the verge of their empire ending, and now it's reversed. I just wanted to get your views on, from your vantage point, on, from a distance, this continuous back and forth.
Well, I'm like a lot of people. I misread Philadelphia this year. If you look back at the picks that we had to make, I thought they were a playoff team for sure. I was really impressed with how they finished last year. I thought that Alain Vigneault had done a really good job with that team. And if you had also, by the way, told me that James Van Riemsdyk would have this kind of resurrection of a season, in addition with everything else I thought that was going to go right with Philadelphia, I would have said, they're right there with all the other great teams. So, I mean, I when I look at surprises and disappointments for this season, and you look at the teams that underachieved. I mean, to me, Philadelphia, Calgary, Columbus are the top three by miles, and so I would say that. I mean, the pieces still look good on paper in Philadelphia to me. I mean, Carter Hart has to sort out whatever was going on with him this year, because we in Canada have been talking about him as a possible candidate to play on the Olympic team. So obviously, based on his performance this year, he's currently played himself out of that. I think that there's still time to get back in the conversation, but he needs to be better for sure. And then, I mean, as these younger players develop, I thought Nolan Patrick would take a stride this year. Still hasn't really got there. Some of these younger guys, Farabee has had moments where he's looked great, and there are other times when you can't find him on the ice. Konechny, I thought, took a step backwards. He was someone that I took. He was someone I took in a fantasy pool this year. I was really excited to have him, and halfway through the year, I dropped him, and I thought, what is going on there? So, I mean, but. The one thing that here, this is not so much me as talking to managers and decision makers around the NHL, very few want to make definitive decisions based on what they've seen this year, because it's just been so disruptive. And so many players, some players have handled it very well. The guys that just sort of breeze through life without a care and just take everything in stride are doing fine. But that's not everybody in the NHL. And there are hundreds of players who, the complications that it's exerted on their home lives, or I think it's even been harder on the single players, because, when you're on your own and you're isolated and you're bored, your mind can do terrible things. And so I think that organizationally, the smart teams are the ones that will take a step back and say, okay, it was a messed up year. We were terrible, but to make any kind of significant roster moves based on a year as complicated and complex as this would be short-sighted. So I think that's what's going to happen. I think people will all take this collective deep breath.
Uh-oh. That's a long breath by Eric. All right.
You lost signal.
Yeah, we may have lost him.
Yeah, I can edit this out, guys. I mean,
that's fine.
You can just do a closing on him, and I'll text him. Hold him in, just take him off here.
Well, that was great having Eric Duhatschek on. Everybody should go check him out on Twitter, in The Athletic, and in other places on the web, because he's a legend. With a few minutes left, let's we've already had the Flyers Leafs talk. I'll mention one thing about the Rangers. Morgan Barron may make his NHL debut tonight. I've watched him for a while, covering the ECAC, playing for Cornell. Last year, they really got a season taken away from him, where Cornell really could have gone all the way, and the whole season blew up. I think he could have an impact with the team. He's not going to get to play center, I'm sure of that. He'll probably have to play on the wing, but I do think he could be an NHL center. So we'll see if he gets in that. But that Ranger-Islander game, if you're a Ranger fan and you're holding out hope that this means something for the season, it doesn't. This game is for next season. It's just the competition is good. It's good that they're competitive down the stretch, but it's all for next season.
This is Russ's version of the Ice Bucket Challenge for Ranger fans.
It's just true. It's just, I don't know. I can't coddle the audience. I'm not going to do it.
No, there shouldn't, and you certainly shouldn't. However, what the audience should do is they need to get in the game with Upper Deck ePack, where you can buy, open, and collect hockey cards of your favorite NHL players anytime, anywhere. They're not just digital cards, but real cards that you get mailed directly to you. Trade with fans from around the world. Sign up and open a free pack of cards every day, only at upperdeckepack.com. That's upperdeckepack.com.
So I will let you go one moment on the Flyers, Ant, because their season is sort of crashing and burning now, and fans are, in one way, they were relieved when the season was, when there was no playoff hope, and now they're sort of like medium angry. They're not like really angry, but the minute the season ends, I do believe, and Kevin Allen brought this up the other day when we were on the show, Chuck Fletcher is really under the microscope now, and I think that's the focus now.
I agree with you, and it's going to be – I do think what Eric brought up here is something that does need to be put into consideration for this team, in that smart – you do have to take a deep breath and step back and say, really what's going on with your team if you're Chuck Fletcher, and you should kind of have an idea of, as Eric indicated, especially for the younger players who took a step back this year, there is a mental toll. I think Lisa Dillman had a really good quote from Gabe Velarde the other day about the difference
I saw that.
of that this season, and I think it's really something that is a league-wide thing for the younger players in this league who have struggled. That being said, Philadelphia is in a certain part of their developmental cycle here, where things are, Chuck Fletcher was brought in not as a general manager to cultivate, develop the younger players. He was brought in with the intention of bridging this team into continual contention, and that they had a massive step back this season. So there's going to be a real interesting juggle this offseason of where do we look at it and say, deep breath, step back, who do we want to kind of stay with? But also looking at the dynamics within the room, who is it that's in and who is it that's out, based off of how they played this year and how they've been this year.
Yeah, makes sense. one last thing I noticed, looks like EJ Raddick's going to make his NHL play-by-play broadcast debut with one of the NHL showcase games. Good for EJ. I got to see him in when I was out in Michigan and in Plymouth, and I used to see him all the time at MSG, so we know each other really well. I knew him before the big gig that he's got now on NHL Network, so I'm happy to see him get this chance. He knows his hockey. He should be fun, Mike. I think this will be good.
I remember my conversations we used to have when he used to come in as a scout. Eric would hold EJ would hold court with everybody, and he would talk for even after the game 30, 40 minutes with everybody, just and sharing his knowledge with everybody. And I've always sort of appreciated him taking that time out, especially when I was a younger writer, to provide what his observations are, and you learned a lot from him. And all the best to EJ, obviously, on this opportunity.
Mike, any thoughts on that?
No, I mean, I'm curious I've never heard him do play-by-play.
Me neither.
So I'm curious to hear him, and obviously with everything switching over now between NBC going to ESPN and TNT, there are going to be opportunities for announcers, and I mean, we saw how Mike Tirico converted to being an NHL play-by-play guy, and he thought he did it pretty well, and maybe EJ this is a way of him possibly getting a gig with one of those outlets. So I'm anxious to hear how he sounds.
No, that's a great point. I hadn't really thought about that. This could be like a tryout.
Yeah.
Audition. Here's my tape.
Yeah, could be. Well, like I said, all the best to him. And that's it for Off the Post, and we'll catch everybody next time.
Take care, everybody.